Welcome to Better Than Ever Live, wherever you're watching or wherever you're listening. Hope you're making today your masterpiece. In today's show, we have a lot of good stuff. We're going to talk about how cutting the amount of time you use your phone, just an hour a day, actually improves your mental health. We're going to talk about intermittent fasting, why it might not improve weight loss. We'll talk about salt substitutes and stroke and heart attack risk. We're going to talk about exercise and your cravings for fatty foods, the type of food that keeps you tired, and the type of wine that might benefit your health. I'm Dr. David Geier, double board certified orthopedic surgeon, sports medicine specialist, media medical expert. I help you feel and perform your best regardless of age, injury, or medical conditions. Please understand, as always, I'm not giving you medical advice. This is meant for general information and educational purposes only. If you have comments or questions about any of the studies we talk about in today's show, please leave those in the chat, not in the comments. If you're on YouTube, I can only see the chat. If you're on Facebook or LinkedIn, wherever you're putting the comments is good with me. I'd love to know where you're located as well as your first name as well. Good afternoon, and Jamie, good to see you. I hope everybody is doing well today. Sorry I'm not in my normal scrubs with the Dr. David Geier. I just got done with a podcast interview that I will share pretty soon, talking about a lot of this kind of stuff. Really exciting. And I hope you liked the a little bit more mellow intro music. I've gotten some concerns about me always playing hip-hop music, and it doesn't really seem to fit me or the audience, and so I'm trying to add a little bit more rock music, but that was a little mellow. I'm not gonna lie to you. Romania checking in. Really glad to have you. Thanks so much. It's got to be late your time, and I think and I'm sorry, I've already forgotten your first name. You told me last time, but I'm pretty sure he's from Hungary too. So anyway, let's get started with something that may surprise you a little bit. I'm going to talk about a study that shows that certain types of alcohol might actually be good for your health. This was a study published in the journal Obesity, Science and Practice. Researchers at Iowa State looked at almost 2,000 adults between 40 and 80 years old, and they looked at a variety of different health effects. And I'll talk a little bit more, but you know how I feel about alcohol generally. But they found that certain types may be better than others. As far as bad types of alcohol, not that any of it's good, but really bad, beer and liquor led to higher levels of visceral fat. We've talked about visceral fat. This is the fat you can't see it. This is not the subcutaneous fat of your abdomen. This is around your liver and around your intestines and around your spleen and around your stomach that is very bad for your health. Increases the risk of dying from heart attacks and other cardiovascular disease. It is not, again, the fat that makes you look bad. You won't see it, but it is very dangerous. Beer and liquor, much higher increases in visceral fat. Wine, on the other hand, did not lead to that amount of visceral fat accumulation. In fact, red wine led people to have less visceral fat. So if you're going to drink something and you're worried about visceral fat and your overall health, maybe you drink red wine. There's also some thoughts about red wine and resveratrol, and I think that's largely overblown. There is some resveratrol that is good for your heart, good for blood lipids and high blood pressure in red wine, but not nearly enough. If you care about resveratrol that much, again, this is not medical advice, but you might consider a supplement rather than red wine, or you probably just eat red grapes, probably healthier than the red wine. Having said that, either red or white wine seems to be better as far as visceral fat goes compared to beer or liquor. But it does seem that white wine, if you like white wine, might be good for your bone health more so than red wine. People that drank white wine tended to have better bone health. Now, here's my thing real quickly about alcohol in case you've missed some of our other shows. I know a lot of people say that, it's been linked to longer life and lower risks of death and all this in these various studies from years, really not years ago, decades ago. The problem is those studies have all pretty much been shown to be very flawed. They were based largely on people that didn't drink then but were former alcoholics or had other really bad health conditions. When you took those into account, alcohol had a very negative effect on your health and longevity. So having said that, if you're going to drink alcohol, try to do it in moderation. Generally, for men, that's less than 2 drinks per day. Women, that's usually less than 1 drink. What is that? 10 ounces of wine for men, 5 ounces of wine for a woman, 24 ounces of beer. And again, according to this, beer is bad, but if you were going to have beer, 24 ounces of beer for men, or 2 cans of beer, or 1 12-ounce beer for women, 2 ounces of liquor for men, 1 ounce of liquor for women. I would try to tell you, try to do that as little as you can. I'm not, I drink occasionally, but I tell you, you're going to hear more and more studies talk about how damaging alcohol is. But as far as visceral fat goes, red wine better than the others. Bone mineral density, white wine might be better. All right, there is a food that is keeping you tired. Gin and tonics are good for fever and malaria. Somebody needs to do a study on that. That's pretty funny. I have a feeling, at least the fever, it might have exactly the opposite. I am not good at geography. I used to play trivia at bar nights with my brother sometimes. He is really good at geography. He can find every single country on a map. It's pretty impressive. Red wine does increase your HDL levels. I'll be curious. I'd love to see a study, though, if it increases your functional HDL, or is the increase in HDL is some of that dysfunctional HDL that's not actually protective. I don't know. I'm not necessarily anti-red wine. I'm certainly a big red grapes fan. Any of you that know me personally know I love my red grapes. It's just more the alcohol that I have an issue with as much as anything. All right, let's talk about the food that keeps you tired. This is sort of counterintuitive, but I think that if this is something you eat a lot of, you might look at making a change. This is a simple change. This is published in the journal Nutrients. What these researchers found is that if you eat processed meat, you're more likely to suffer both physical and mental fatigue. So processed meats are canned meats, which I don't know how a lot of people eat that. This is sausage. This is bacon. This is processed lunch meats. This is those types of things. Beef jerky is a processed meat. The researchers took 20 young adults in their mid-20s and mid-30s, looked at their gut microbiome to see how it affected their mental and physical energy, as well as mental fatigue and physical fatigue. The ones that ate more processed meat, in fact, the processed meat was the only food associated with changes in energy levels, physical and mental fatigue, physical and mental energy. No other type of food had a role, but processed meats did. Now, again, this is correlation, not causation, so maybe there's some other factor, but these have a ton of negative effects anyway. Processed meat increases your risk of heart disease, potentially associated with a shorter life. So if you care about performing well at work or at school, or just, you have a game or a workout later, maybe you don't eat the bacon, maybe you don't eat the sausage, maybe you don't eat the processed lunch meats, those kinds of things, the beef jerkies, or at least eat it in moderation. Let's go that far. I am not familiar with the French paradox. I don't know. I don't know if that's a reference to they drink a lot of red wine and that has some benefit to their health. Let me know more about that. I'm not 100% sure what that is. All right. Talking about fatty foods, and some processed meats are fatty, there is a way that if you want to cut your cravings for unhealthy foods, fatty foods, you might try this one thing. A study was done in the journal Obesity. Researchers at Washington State found that, and this was a rat study, but what they found is high intensity exercise reduces, at least for rats, the desire to eat fatty food after a long period without fatty food. So what they did, they wanted to test a phenomenon called incubation of craving, which basically means the longer you go without something that you crave, the harder it is to ignore that desire to have it. In this case, fatty foods. So they took 28 rats. I'd love to actually watch this happen, but 28 rats, put them through a training program teaching the rats to push a lever. The lever would turn on a light, make a sound, but would also dispense a high-fat pellet treat for them to eat. After the rats got trained in that, then they pulled it away. Then they reinstituted it with two groups. One group, or both groups, got access to the lever again. One group exercised before the lever was reintroduced. The other one didn't, and they wanted to see how many times the rats would push the lever. What they found out is the rats who did not exercise pressed the lever significantly more times than the rats in the exercise group. The researchers say, hey, this shows that exercise diminishes your cravings for fatty foods. Now, what's interesting about this is there's a lot of debate in the psychology world and the nutrition world about whether food can be addicting. I would tell you that processed foods, especially processed carbs, probably can. Foods with trans fats probably can be addictive. But ignoring the rats, ignoring whether or not food can actually be addictive, exercising on a regular basis, especially if you're just having a craving for, I don't know, sweets or fast food or something like that, maybe go out for a run, maybe go to the gym and do a hard workout. I bet you find that desire to eat those types of foods drops a fair amount. French, man, less heart ischemia. Alcohol increases the risk. Yeah, there was a study. In fact, I did it on this show. I don't remember, maybe a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, that alcohol does not really decrease the risk of heart disease and cardiovascular disease as previously thought. I'm sure there's other factors in that, maybe alcohol raising your homocysteine levels. There could be a lot to that. I'm fine if you drink alcohol every now and then. Just don't use, hey, I'm trying to improve my health as the excuse. Now, people will say, well, nobody in their right mind says that they drink because it's good for your health. I will differ with that because in my prior practice to where I am now, the patients fill out a new patient questionnaire and it talks about, one of the questions, how much alcohol do you smoke, all that kind of thing. And I would always ask people, it'd say a glass of wine at night or whatever. So many people. And I would just, out of curiosity, would ask some of them. They all said it was because wine is good for your health, which just doesn't seem to necessarily be true. All right, let's talk about salt substitutes. This one I think is interesting, and I'm going to talk about it on TV here in Charleston next week, that salt substitutes may lower risk. Now, in case you're wondering, table salt that you sprinkle on your food is sodium chloride. Salt substitutes replace some or all of the sodium chloride, and sodium is what's thought to be bad for high blood pressure, which increases cardiovascular risk, stroke, heart attack, that kind of thing. So salt substitutes replace some or all of the sodium chloride with potassium chloride. And if you read studies about hypertension, generally you want less sodium and more potassium. But with potassium, you have to be careful. If you're already on a high blood pressure medication, you could get really high levels of potassium that are bad for your heart. Or if you've got kidney damage, potassium can be damaging. So if you're going to talk about a salt substitute, maybe if you've got high blood pressure, you might talk to your doctor. But let's talk about this study. Chinese researchers took over 20,000, I should say, participants living in rural China, all over 60, all had high blood pressure, and then they were split into two different groups. One just had regular table salt. One had a salt substitute that was 75% sodium chloride, 25% potassium chloride, and looked at what effect it had on their stroke risk. And basically what they found is the ones that had the low sodium salt or the salt substitute, 13% lower risk of stroke, 14% lower risk of stroke, 13% lower risk combined of stroke and heart attacks. And like I said, you can go to a grocery store, supermarket, anywhere and find these salt substitutes that are more potassium chloride than sodium chloride. There's Morton salt substitute, has absolutely no sodium in it. Generally, you want your sodium to be 1,500 milligrams of sodium or less a day. The problem is one little teaspoon, one little scoop of sodium, way more than 1,500 milligrams of sodium. Here's the problem, though, with that, is that this is a study done in rural China, where by and large they cook their own meals, and so then they put table salt on their food for seasoning. But that's not what Americans do. 70% of the sodium that we get in our diet isn't from what we sprinkle on. That only makes up 11% of it. 70% of our sodium, and we average 5,000 milligrams of sodium a day. In some parts of the country, it's as high as 15 and 20,000 milligrams a day, not the 1,500 milligrams that it really should be. 70% of our sodium comes from processed foods, pre-prepared food, frozen foods, restaurant foods, fast foods, that kind of thing. Very little of it's from actually sprinkling it on our food. So yes, a potassium chloride salt substitute might help a little bit, but I would tell you, if you really want to make a change to high blood pressure and overall your risk of cardiovascular disease, maybe you eat less food in a bag, less food in a box, less food that's in the frozen food aisle, less food in a can, and eat more whole foods that you actually have to cook. Maybe you don't eat fast foods. Maybe you cut down on the number of times you go to restaurants. All right, let's see. Dumonkus. I hope I'm saying that right. I knew it was something like that. I just didn't want to get it wrong. I apologize. Great to have you here. All right, I want to talk real quick about intermittent fasting. And I do intermittent fasting, so this interests me, even though I don't really do it to lose weight. But a whole lot of people that do intermittent fasting do it to lose weight. This was a study in probably the most reputable journal, the New England Journal of Medicine, looking at intermittent fasting compared to just caloric restriction for losing weight. If you're new to intermittent fasting, the more appropriate term is time-restricted eating or time-restricted feeding. Basically, you limit all your meals, all your food within a certain time window each day. 6 hours, 8 hours, something like that. Some people do 4 hours or 2 hours, and then the rest of the time they're fasting. Now, outside of that, you don't eat anything, or at worst, it's water or black coffee or something like that. Yes, I know the Bulletproof folks do the Bulletproof coffee, which has grass-fed butter and coconut oil, brain octane oil, that kind of thing. But we're talking about actual strict time-restricted feeding and whether that's good as a form of weight loss. Now, the argument is this. Calorie restriction works. We've done a whole show on this before. If you cut, say your basal metabolic rate is 2,000 and you cut that down 300 milligrams a day, yes, you will gradually lose weight. Now your metabolism starts to reset over time, but that has been shown over and over and over again to be effective. The problem with it is it's hard. Eating less than you want to eat is hard to do. So the theory with a lot of people with time-restricted feeding is, all right, I'm just going to only eat in 8 hours or in 6 hours and then won't eat the rest of the time. That'll keep my calories low. Some people say that leads to eating more in that time window, so you end up blowing through what you would get with calorie restriction. Some say, hey, that works and that works well. So this study wanted to figure out, all right, how well does time-restricted feeding work? This is extremely controversial in the nutrition world. Like I said, I am biased because I really like time-restricted feeding. I love my brain function when I'm not on, when I'm in the fasting phase. I'm a big fan. But yeah, maybe it's not for everybody. Anyway, long way to get to this. The researchers took 139 patients that were obese, started them on a reduced calorie diet, but half had to eat all their food within an 8-hour period. Half just ate the reduced amount of food however they wanted. Followed them for a year. These 139 people did that. The weight loss was exactly the same between the two groups. Blood pressure was the same. Cholesterol was the same. Glucose levels were the same. So it didn't seem to matter. It was the caloric restriction, whether or not you ate it all in a small amount of time, that seemed to make the difference. Now, the good news is that both groups lost the same amount of weight, somewhere between 14 and 17 pounds over a year. That's fantastic. They lost body fat. They lost inches from their waistline. It just mattered whether or not they ate in a smaller amount of time or it was over a period of time. What I would tell you from this is try it for yourself and see which you like better. If you can eat smaller amounts of calories, but you eat your normal schedule, by all means, do that. Now, there are some other benefits of time-restricted feeding, autophagy, and things that are sort of beyond the scope of this. But a lot of people, I know so many people that do intermittent fasting or time-restricted feeding, and they will tell you they feel better on it. So see what works for you. But cutting those calories somehow can be a good thing for you. And then let's talk about your cell phone. This is probably not going to be a surprise to anybody. So one of the podcasts I used to listen to, I just don't like listening to news and politics stuff that much, so I don't listen to it. But I did for a while listen to Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert. And I remember he said that he could make an app that determined if you had poor mental health. He could make that app in about 10 minutes. And it would basically be a one-question app. You'd open the app and it would ask you, do you use your cell phone, yes or no? And if you answered yes, poor mental health. His point is, if you use a smartphone, your mental health is going to suffer. He was being a little facetious, but there's some truth to it. Well, anyway, this study that just came out was published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology. What they found out, so on average, people look at their smartphones 3 hours a day. In fact, a lot of people way more than 3 hours a day. I've seen numbers as high as 4.5 hours a day. But let's just take 3 hours a day. So what these German researchers wanted to find out, can we make our lives, can we be better off without our smartphones, or at least just by cutting back? And is there a sweet spot into how much time we can use our phones? So they took over 600 people, put them into 3 groups. About 200 couldn't use their smartphone at all for a week. About 200 cut the amount that they used it just by an hour a day, and then another roughly 200 did just like normal use of their cell phones. They were interviewed about lifestyle habits, well-being, right after that week stopped, a month later, and 4 months later. And what they found out, both the group that completely gave up their smartphones for a week and the group that cut their use just by an hour a day, both had positive effects on their well-being, their mental health, their lifestyle. But the group that just cut it an hour, the benefits lasted even longer. Basically, they kept their positive effects longer than the group that completely gave it up. So that 1 week, just cutting it for 1 week, an hour a day for 1 week, had long-term improvements in mental health. Doesn't seem so bad, right? Cutting the amount of time you spend on social media, on sports websites, playing games on your phone, just an hour less a day. So much better in terms of life satisfaction, overall mental health. It really doesn't seem like it would be that hard, but I will tell you, a lot of people are addicted. Personal story about this. So I took a trip last summer to the Galapagos Islands with a lot of family, and it was a small cruise ship. I mean, really small. It only had like 90 room for 90 people, a little tiny boat. But the internet was horrendous. They would give you 7 hours of internet time for the 8 days or whatever it was. I doubt anybody used more than an hour because you couldn't connect to anything with a picture. It just didn't load. So there was no Instagram, none of that. And so basically the only 2 times I used it were to download books onto my iPad so I could read. But talking to the people that were with us, and a lot of them say that week of not being on their phones significantly cut how much they used social media and stuff when they got back. In fact, those effects persisted. And it's funny, a lot of people on that trip said that. So try it. If you can go a week without your phone, hell, go a day without your phone. And I would struggle to do that too, but I feel like I could do it. I just have to make sure I had other stuff to do, exercise, go out for a walk, be with friends, read. But I feel like I could do it. But I think you'd be surprised a period of time away from your phone, how good it can feel. But as this story says, that may not be sustainable. Just cut it an hour a day. After dinner, not scrolling social media, or scrolling social media first thing in the morning when you get out of bed, or when you before you go to bed at night. It may be better just to cut something back rather than to get rid of it completely. So just a thought with that. That is all I've got for you. Let's see what comments you have today. Definitely share those with me. Andrea from Hungary, it's good to see you again. And yes, that would be another thing to do. Like Andrea says, get out in nature. We are not in the woods here in Charleston, South Carolina. We are on the beach, but in our case, it would be going to the beach, getting out in the water, that kind of thing. big fan of that. All right, that is all I've got for you. If you like information like this, if you know people that like information about health, wellness, feeling to perform your best, definitely tell them to check us out. Follow us. You see all the social media links: YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. You can go to my website, drdavidgeier.com, where you can get the podcast version of this show, Better Than Ever Live, or you can get that wherever you get your podcast. You can also get the Better Than Ever Daily podcast, as well as thousands of articles and other videos that I have written. If you'd like to see me as a patient, if you have an orthopedic injury, bone, tendon, ligament, joint, that you want some options more than cortisone shot, surgery, physical therapy, I'd love to help. Or if it's, hey, look, I want to feel better, I want to improve my performance, improve muscle mass, decrease fat so that I can get up the stairs without getting out of breath, I can play with my kids without pain, without any of that, I would love to help. I see patients in Charleston, South Carolina, occasionally in Charlotte, North Carolina, but mostly in Charleston. In the description below this video is my website, drdavidgeier.com. You can go to the contact page and contact me, and we can talk about either seeing me as a patient or some other ways to work together. Yes, beach is a part of nature, and there's some other comments that I don't know that I necessarily understand. But anyway, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Also, join us on Fridays if you have an orthopedic question. That Ask Dr. Geier Fridays, 12 p.m. Eastern time is the only time of the week I answer your orthopedic questions, talk about injuries, talk about surgeries, talk about recovery, all that kind of good stuff. So join us on Fridays. Thursday, 5 p.m. Eastern time, I will be right back here for Better Than Ever Live. Looking forward to seeing you there. And that is really all I've got for you. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day and evening, and I will see you on Thursday. Take care.